Good morning. You may have noticed that there is a big discussion on Twitter lately about Christian nationalism, especially involving the Andrew Torba book on the topic and the Stephen Wolfe book on the topic. There's been a flurry of interviews, promotion. Stephen Wolfe's book has made it very high on the Amazon sales list, so this is an important discussion. And the way I see the discussion playing out, there are actual liberals, open liberals, leftists, progressives, and they hate it, and they're all clutching their pearls because Stephen Wolfe said something about women or something about race or something. And then there are the big Eva type. They try to be the principled pluralists, and they try to stand back from the fray, and they try to say there's a third way, and these guys are an embarrassment to Christianity. Then there would be the classical liberals. Classical liberals would be someone like myself, or Andrew Sandlin, or Michael O'Fallon, Jacob Brunton, many others that I could think if I just sat down for a minute. But the point is, people that believe in a constitutional republic with some democratic elements, but we're really a republic. And we believe in limited government. We believe in religious liberty, or perhaps a better way to frame it is cognitive liberty. We don't believe that there should be blasphemy laws, especially new ones. It's one thing if there's these old traditions about you're not allowed to go out and drop F-bombs in public around kids. We understand that, okay? And it's one thing to say we should not have drag queen story hour. We understand that. Which classical liberal is saying we should have drag queen story hour? Do you really think David French is a classical liberal? Anyway, I point this out because the classical liberals believe that what we have in our society today is not classical liberalism. It's not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. Well, classical liberalism would have plenty of answers to the drag queen story hour problem, or to the problem of people going out in public being nude, or saying things that children shouldn't hear. We have answers to those problems. It's not that we don't have a framework for it. The classical liberals believe in a limited government. They believe that the federal government especially should not be telling us what religion we all need to be. It should not be putting in position only people that affirm a certain faith statement. Can you imagine if we were a theocracy of that kind? So you get Stephen Wolfe talking about how, well, in his ideal Protestant state, it would be sort of a neo-Puritanism state. And he doesn't believe in doing it the way they did in the old days, where they would burn people alive or drown them. He just believes in taking heretical pastors and putting them in jail for a very long time. But he thinks you have to be sensitive about it because you have to pay attention to whether your society will consider that acceptable or whether or not it'll create an uprising. So we need to be prudent, wise, caring, compassionate, but we need to put heretics in jail. That's his position. The classical liberals will say, no. So how do you describe this position of Stephen Wolfe? Well, I think Christian nationalism is probably going to be the name for it because they've carved out that space. They've said that's what Christian nationalism is. There is a huge debate over whether or not that's the right definition. Because after all, which Christian doesn't want our nation to be a Christian nation? And is nationalism itself a bad thing? Well, that's an ambiguous term. Christian nationalism is even more ambiguous. But why am I making this video today? What was the whole point of this video? I wanted to point out that Robles, he's an Andrew Torba fan. He recently has been saying a lot of things that make me think that he would side with Stephen Wolfe's views on punishing heretics, blasphemy laws, Sabbath laws, heresy laws. He seems to think that that is consistent with a Christian understanding of political theory today. That's concerning to me. I used to work with AD, and let me tell you a little bit about the work that we used to do together. So several years back, I contacted AD and I told him, hey, I want to help you grow your platform, because I was coaching people at that time on how to grow platforms. He did not have a Patreon. Now he has many, many patrons. I'm the one that talked to him about it and said, hey, I think you should get a Patreon. I think that that is the way to go. But let's weigh out the pros and cons of doing this. Is this a platform that you want to be on? And also, do you want the public scrutiny that's going to come? Are you really ready to count the cost, pay the price, to be a public figure on these issues? And I talked about it with him, and he made the decision that he wanted to do it. And he grew, and he did a good job. At some point later, I built him a website to collect email addresses and set him up a little email welcome series. So I did that kind of thing for him, and I made this infographic. I want to tell you about the infographic because this is kind of funny. It was A.D. Robles presents 7 cheap tactics of the Christian social justice warrior. we workshopped it together. He and I talked over the phone for a couple hours, and we mapped out what were the 7 tactics. And this was mostly AD's ideas. I sort of just drew it out of him. So these are AD's ideas. But let me read to you what that infographic said. So number 1 was get the emotional juices going. Here's a story about someone who is terribly victimized. Now, I just want to point out that there's something funny going on here, because these cheap tactics that you can use on Twitter or in a personal conversation, they are the kind that you could use for any position, not just for the position of the Christian social justice warriors in 2019, who were trying to say things like, we need race-based reparations in the United States. The federal government should tax everybody and then give massive handouts to black people because of something that happened to people that look like them, whether or not they're even descended from those people. So in 2019, this was the cheap tactic that we saw on Twitter. We saw, was a wrong done? Is it right to right wrongs? This is Tabidi Anapuile. And of course, A.D. Robles made a great video talking about the Tabidi two-step, ridiculing that position. You can't just do that. That's cheap. To say, was a wrong done? Is it right to right wrongs? Well, therefore, race-based financial reparations at the federal level in the United States in 2019. Come on. You need a little bit more to your argument than that. That's cheap. And so he called it the 7 cheap tactics. Well, listen, getting the emotional juices going. Here's a story about someone who is terribly victimized. That is not a monopoly for the social justice warriors. In fact, I think that the anti-social justice guys, having watched the social justice guys for so long, have started to imitate some of their cheap tactics. So today we see, oh, well, we need to do everything we can to fight against this injustice of the drag queen story hour. Well, it is an injustice, and it certainly gets the emotional juices flowing. So there's a parallel here. There has been someone who has been victimized, innocent children, 6-year-olds, watching these men dressed like women dancing around provocatively. And sure, so there is a victim. So step 1, yes. Now, I'm not saying this is always wrong. And in fact, in the video that I recorded with AD back a couple years ago, we talked about this. We said it's not always wrong to point out that there is a victim and to get people emotionally invested. But I want to point out that what they are doing follows the same pattern. And in the end, it will be up to you to ask whether or not this is cheap. So let's start with a story that seems strategically calculated to get us into the right frame of mind to be able to move in the rhetorical direction that we have decided on. Here's a story about someone who's terribly victimized. This poor 6-year-old, he's watching a drag queen story hour presentation. By the way, classical liberals would have no problem outlining that. Matt Walsh has outlined the gender-changing surgeries in Tennessee. There are ways to do that don't involve throwing away the constitutional republic. Anyway, so we go on to the next part. So, jump to a generalization. That was the next step that A.D. Robles so competently pointed out several years back. Jump to a generalization. So, he would say, well, this problem is happening everywhere, all the time. And it's the kind of thing that is destroying our society. So, for example, you might talk about somebody being racist to somebody else, or maybe a black man getting shot by the police. You say, this is happening everywhere, all the time. Okay, so you expand, you aggravate, you exasperate the problem in the mind of your hearer. Okay? Well, that's certainly what they're doing. If you're talking about Drag Queen Story Hour as the basis of your theological approach to politics, and if it's every time you come up to that discussion, it's Drag Queen Story Hour, Drag Queen Story Hour. Yeah, you're doing the same thing. You're making a generalization. You're saying this is the main thing that matters. We need to talk about this right now. This is the only thing that matters. Why would you do that? Well, because it sets you up to not see all of the decisions that need to be made in a context. For instance, would you be willing to throw away the U.S. Constitution in order to get rid of this one problem? Well, the more you talk about that one problem, the more you can persuade people that, yes, we should get rid of the U.S. Constitution. Okay, going on to the next step. Insert identity politics. So, in the case of the social justice warriors, this would be something like, well, yeah, but see, I understand what it's like to be a black person, but you could never understand that because you're white. And so you're not really fit to evaluate my claims about whether or not this is a massive problem of systemic racism. Well, how How did these Christian nationalists do it? Well, all kinds of ways. One way is that they'll appeal to white identitarianism, or in the case of someone like Cody Robles, he'll say, well, you don't understand, I'm above the fray because I'm Puerto Rican and part black. But of course Cody Libel, you could say what you want, but he'll try to diminish what I'm saying. He'll try to diminish my argument by pointing out that he is a person of a certain identity. He did that the other day. I could find it if you want. Point is, they will try to draw lines and say, you're in this group and I'm in this group, and so since you're in that group, you can't see this problem. Okay. Is this conducive to arguing about the actual problem, or is this a rhetorical cheap trick? Ask Cody Robles 3 years ago. Next, play tricks with scripture. Of course, they'll appeal to let justice roll down like water. Cheap tricks, right? Well, somebody might say, do you even believe in loving your neighbor as yourself? That's a cheap appeal to scripture. Well, Stephen Wolf would do this on Twitter frequently. I've seen it happen, where he just says something to the effect of, we believe in making laws that are good, and wouldn't it be good for society if we were all encouraged by laws to be Christian? So shouldn't we have laws that encourage people to be Christian? That's a real cheap trick. I mean, I don't know what to say about it other than, that's not very academic for a guy that is pretending to be an academic type of a thinker. So, do you even believe in loving your neighbor as yourself? That's the appeal of the common good conservatives these days. Next cheap tactic is pull a bait and switch. Was a wrong committed? Is it right to right wrongs? And so the bait and switch in this case might be something about Drag Queen Story Hour. We need to right this wrong by whatever means. We need to do it immediately. Well, no, not by whatever means. The classical liberals agree with you that we need to right the wrong, but the debate here is over how. And so the bait and switch is when you accuse the classical liberals of not being interested in solving the problem, or not being able to solve the problem. Why do you have it out for the classical liberals? We're not the ones doing this. Finally, well, let's see, there's a couple more. Beg the question. So AD, a couple years ago, was capable of identifying this dishonest pattern of begging the question. Society needs to care for the oppressed. That's justice. Society needs to preserve itself long range and not collapse into depravity. So, that's justice. Whatever it takes to prevent this collapse into depravity, whether it would be doing what Matt Walsh is doing in Tennessee, which is good, or throwing away the Constitution, throwing away the First Amendment, the protection for cognitive liberty. It's begging the question, my friends. Finally, check out of the conversation. You're not listening. You just need to educate yourself. Google it. It's dumb and cheap, but checking out of the conversation is what happens whenever I press these Christian nationalist guys, whether it be Stephen Wolf or William Wolf or Cody Robles, Thomas Acord, any of these guys. I ask them questions about, hey, what are you saying? What is your actual meaning here? Can we define your position? And they always say, oh, just buy my book. No. If you're going to make a claim that's ambiguous and seemingly has offensive implications, I'm just going to right then and there say it's ambiguous and it has some seemingly offensive implications. And here's why. I'm not appealing to my feelings. I am appealing to the fact that in order for human beings to survive in society, we need certain rights. And the things that are being advocated by the Christian nationalists seem to throw that away. Well, it's a sad situation. Cody Robles, I make this video for you, that you would just think through it. I'm not saying that you're going to agree with all the points, but perhaps you would have some self-awareness, that you would think about the fact that there are some ways that your arguments could easily begin to resemble the 7 cheap tactics of the Christian social justice warrior. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later.